This story is so haunting it lingers long after the last word, set in snow-dusted timber, abandoned mines, and watchful mountains. It's where a hunter and the hunted collide by chance or by design in the unforgiving world of ash and vows. It starts with a trail of blood barely visible in the frost, a small sign that would drag buried secrets back into the light. Before we kick off this adventure, don't forget to hit like on the video and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. The mountains carried a silence that pressed down on a man's chest, the kind that made every breath feel earned. Up in the high country, where the air thinned and the cold lingered long past its welcome, winter never fully loosened its grip. That was where the story took root, among the harsh ridges and shadowed valleys of the San Juan Range, a land that showed little mercy and offered even less comfort. The peaks stood distant and aloof, rising like judges that had seen too much of mankind to care anymore. Near the timberline, almost a mile above the closest trail, a man had chosen to vanish from the world. Cole Ashwood had come here to be forgotten. Cole was 38. Though the mountains had carved years into him, that time alone could not explain. His face bore the hard lines of survival, etched deep by grief rather than age. His eyes carried the weight of things endured, not merely lived through. He belonged to two worlds and fit cleanly into neither. Apache blood ran through him on his mother's side, while circumstance had raised him among white men who taught him toughness before casting him aside. For 5 years, he had lived alone in a small log cabin pressed against the mountainside, as if the land itself had barely agreed to let it stay. No lamplight from town ever reached him. No church bell echoed his name. No human voice called out across the valley. There was only wind whispering through ponderosa pines and the relentless work of surviving one day at a time. That solitude was not an accident. It was exactly what Cole wanted. He had not always been a shadow in the trees. Once, he mattered. He had been a renowned tracker for the frontier marshals, a man hired to follow fugitives through snow and stone, a man trusted to collect debts in the name of the law. In those days, he had a partner, Grady Holt, and a wife, Elin Ashwood. Back then, Cole believed in loyalty. He believed in tomorrow. He learned too late that belief, placed in the wrong hands, could ruin a man. 5 years earlier, a bank robbery had unfolded. Badly, or perhaps perfectly, depending on who told the tale. The timing had been arranged, so Cole was sent away on a decoy job. While he was gone, gunfire erupted. When he returned, blood had already seeped into the floorboards. Elin was dead. Grady walked away untouched, his ambition satisfied and his pockets heavy. Cole never reported it. He never hunted Grady down. Instead, he turned his back on the badge, the town, and every man who had once called him brother. He fled into the San Juans and let silence take him, until one morning broke the pattern. That day began like any other. Cole rose early to hunt elk. A thin layer of fresh snow clung to the ground, just enough to capture tracks. He moved with care, rifle resting on his shoulder, eyes sweeping the trees with practiced focus. Hunger sharpens a man's senses. Near the edge of a clearing, far from any settlement, he noticed something near an abandoned mining shack, a relic from a boomtown long dead. Something was wrong. Tracks crossed the frozen soil. Not animal, human. They were small and uneven, cutting toward the sagging structure with desperation. Cole knelt to study them. The steps dragged, favoring one leg. Dark stains dotted the ground. Blood. Instincts he had buried years ago surged back to life. He was no longer just a mountain recluse. He was a tracker again. The shack leaned inward, gray boards splintered, its door hanging loose on a single hinge. Inside, The air smelled of rot and damp earth. Cole moved quietly, boots barely disturbing the packed dirt. Then he saw her. She was pressed against the far wall, half hidden in shadow, clinging to what little strength she had left. Half concealed beneath a filthy, abandoned canvas tarp, she barely looked alive. She was a young woman, maybe late 20s, but hardship had stripped her down to something older. Survival had wrung her dry. Her breathing came shallow and uneven, her skin pale with exhaustion. Cole Ashwood stood still in the dim light, caught between instinct and restraint. His first thought was blunt and undeniable. She's badly hurt. The hem of her dress was torn, stiff with dried mud and darkened by blood. He stepped closer, lowering himself slowly, careful not to spook her. "Easy," he said, his voice rough from disuse. "I'm not here to hurt you." She lifted her eyes to him. Dark, unfocused, edged with panic. Fear lived there, sharp and immediate, but beneath it sat something else. Resolve. She didn't scream. She didn't have the strength. "Where are you hurt?" he asked. She shook her head faintly, lips parting as if to answer, but no sound came. Cole followed instinct. He needed to find the wound. He reached toward the edge of her skirt, meaning only to lift it enough to check her leg, the source of the blood trail. Her reaction was instant and violent. Her hand snapped out and clamped around his wrist with startling force. "Please," she whispered, her voice hoarse, thick with panic and shame. "Stop." Cole froze. He met her eyes and saw tears gathering, not from pain, but from humiliation. She recoiled, curling inward, small and defenseless. I'm not hurt there," she forced out. Understanding struck him like a blow. The terror in her gaze wasn't fear of a stranger alone. It was the learned fear of a woman who knew what men could do. She thought he meant to violate her. Cole yanked his hand back at once, rising so fast he nearly lost his footing. Heat climbed his neck despite the cold. He turned his back to her, giving her the only safety he could. Distance. "I'm sorry," he said quietly, staring at the gray boards of the wall. "I didn't know." Silence stretched, heavy and awkward, broken only by wind rattling the shack's loose boards. Cole felt clumsy, stripped of his hardness. For a moment he wasn't a mountain ghost or a survivor. He was just a man who'd forgotten how to be gentle. After a while, she spoke again. "My leg," she said, her voice trembling. "My ankle. I can't walk much farther." Cole nodded, still not turning around. He crouched, studying the dirt instead. "Can you stand?" She tried. She braced against the wall, pain twisting her face, but her leg gave out. She collapsed back down, breath coming fast and ragged. Then she looked up at him and said the words that shifted everything. "Please," she said. "If I stay here, I'll die. I need help." Cole shut his eyes. For 5 years, he had lived by one rule. Don't get involved. Don't save anyone. Don't carry another life. He had already failed once, with Elin Ashwood, and the weight of that failure still haunted his sleep. But this woman, this stranger named May Rowan, wasn't asking for heroics. She was asking to live, walk away. He turned back to her, studying her face. Young, worn, stubbornly alive, still breathing, still refusing to give in. The sight of it stirred a memory he kept buried. The night he hadn't been there for his wife. The moment he chose solitude over standing his ground. He had survived by retreating, and that choice had followed him ever since. "If you stay here," Cole Ashwood said at last, his voice low and steady, "the mountain will take you before morning." She swallowed, fear tightening her throat as she waited. "And if I go with you?" she whispered. Cole hesitated. "If you come with me," he said carefully, "you might live." It was the most honest promise he could offer. Not safety, just a chance. He knelt in front of her and turned his back, lowering himself. "I'm going to lift you. Hold on if you can." She did. Her arms slipped around his neck, light as they were. He rose with her weight on his shoulders and felt how little there was of her, how fragile hunger and fear had made her. He carried her out of the collapsing mining shack and into the trees, away from the place where she would have died unseen. Behind them, her footprints, the desperate proof she had fought to survive, slowly vanished beneath drifting snow, as if the mountain itself meant to erase them. Cole didn't look back. For the first time in 5 years, he chose not to walk away. The climb to the cabin was punishing. He carried her the final half-mile through dense timber and thickening snow, his breathing controlled despite the strain. The trail rose toward the only shelter he had ever trusted, the ground uneven and slick. She clung to him in silence, jaw tight, refusing to cry out even when her injured ankle shifted and sent sharp pain through her leg. At last, the cabin came into view. Low, plain, built to endure weather rather than offer comfort. Pine logs fitted tight, a stone chimney rising solid, and a porch that sagged just enough to remind a man that nothing escaped time. Cole pushed the door open with his shoulder and stepped inside. Warmth lingered from the fire he had banked earlier. He carried her to the narrow bed beside the hearth and set her down, then stepped back at once to give her space. Only then did he truly look at her. Within the safety of his own walls, he saw a woman who had run until she had nothing left. And in her, he saw himself. A man who had stopped running only to realize he had nowhere else to go. Outside, the wind howled, wiping away their tracks. Inside, silence settled again. But it had changed. It was no longer hollow. Cole Ashwood had broken his rule. He had let the world cross his threshold. As he stirred the fire until it caught and breathed again, a heavy certainty settled in his gut. The solitude he had guarded for so long was gone. The ghost in the timberline had been found. Time moved differently in the high country. Days did not hurry. They unfolded. Morning light crept across the floorboards long before the sun cleared the ridge, and evening arrived like a slow, steady breath. For Cole, who had measured 5 empty years by snowfall and endless nights, time had once been something to endure. Now, with a stranger breathing softly nearby, he began measuring weeks not by dates, but by small changes. The color returning to May Rowan's cheeks, the fear in her eyes easing into cautious curiosity, and the silence of the cabin, once cold and vacant, turning into something shared. Those first weeks passed in quiet care. Cole Ashwood gave her the bed and took the floor for himself, sleeping on a thin bedroll with only the fire's fading warmth to hold back the cold. It was a boundary drawn without words, a promise that she was safe. His strength would stand between her and the world, not be turned against her. He treated her ankle using the old ways, the knowledge passed down from his mother's people. He crushed juniper and sage into poultices, binding the swollen joint with strips of cloth. His work was practiced, deliberate. His hands stayed gentle and distant, careful, never lingering. He offered her dignity along with healing. He noticed how she flinched when he moved too fast, how her breath caught if he stood too close. It told him a story she hadn't spoken, a story of men who used size to threaten and hands to take. So Cole learned to make himself smaller. He knocked on the door frame before entering his own cabin. He kept his voice low. Still, There were limits to what a man alone on the timberline could provide. Lines of propriety he refused to cross. He knew she still felt the grit of the mine and the blood of her escape clinging to her skin. "There's a woman," he told her one morning, standing by the door with his coat pulled tight. "Lives about a quarter-mile down the ridge. An old widow named Nora Bell. If she's home, she might help." The relief that crossed May Rowan's face was almost painful to see. The gratitude of someone who had forgotten she was allowed clean water and soft soap. Cole walked through the drifts to the widow's cabin. Nora Bell was well past 70, her hair white as fresh snow, her eyes sharp as a hawk's. She looked Cole over from the porch and lifted a brow. "What trouble are you bringing me today, Cole?" she asked. "There's a young woman hurt," he said simply. "I don't know how to help her properly." The old woman studied him, searching for a lie, finding only the tired honesty of a man trying to do right. She grabbed her shawl without another word. Back at the cabin, Cole stepped outside, leaning against the rough bark of a pine while the women worked within. He felt foolish standing guard over his own home, listening to low voices and the sound of water being poured. But he stayed. He counted the breaths of wind through the trees and realized that for the first time in years, he wasn't just surviving. He was waiting. When Nora Bell finally came out, pulling her shawl tight against the cold, she nodded. "She'll be fine," she said. "She needs rest, food, and that ankle kept still." She paused, meeting his eyes. "You did right, asking for help." That night, the cabin felt different, softer. May lay cleaner, more at ease beneath the blankets. When Cole set a bowl of broth on the table, she looked at him, and for the first time, there was more light than shadow in her eyes. As winter slowly loosened its grip on the mountains, something shifted between them. Nothing was said. It showed itself in the small, quiet rituals of daily life. May's ankle healed slowly but surely. Cole carved her a walking stick from a solid branch, teaching her how to test the ground before trusting it with her weight. She learned quickly. Pride helped. She hated being helpless, hated the quiet debt she felt growing heavier with every meal he cooked, with every log he split for the fire. So she began to take back pieces of the cabin, one small claim at a time. Morning started with the soft rasp of a broom made from willow twigs. May Rowan swept the floor with fierce focus, careful not to put too much weight on her injured leg. She set the pantry in order. She mended the curtains. She scolded the iron kettle like a stubborn child when it refused to boil fast enough. Cole Ashwood watched the change from the corner of his eye. He noticed things he hadn't expected to notice. He heard her humming when she thought he was outside. He felt the shift when the cabin stopped being a shelter meant only to outlast the weather and began to feel like a place learning how to live. The real turning point, the moment the ice finally cracked, came with a pot of stew. Cole was outside splitting kindling, the steady crack of the axe the only sound echoing through the valley. Then a sharp, biting smell cut the air. Not the warm, wood smoke scent of the hearth. Something harsher. Burned. He dropped the axe and rushed inside, heart slamming in his chest. He grabbed the water bucket and hurled it toward the stove, bracing for flames. There were none. The water splashed wide, soaking May clear through. She yelped, frozen in place with a wooden spoon clenched in her hand, eyes wide. The fire was fine. The only casualty was a pot of venison stew, scorched black and ruined beyond saving. Cole stood there, chest heaving, water dripping from the ceiling. He stared at the ruined meal. Then he looked at May, and the sight of her broke him. She shrank back, shoulders curling inward as if bracing for a blow, her face drained of color. I thought I could help," she stammered, panic rising. "I'm sorry, I'm so sorry." She was waiting for anger, for shouting, for the kind of violence she had known in the life she'd fled. Cole looked at the blackened crust in the pot, then at May, drenched, gripping the spoon like a weapon. The absurdity of it all hit him at once. He started to laugh. At first it came out rough and unfamiliar, a rusty sound, like a door hinge that hadn't moved in years. Then it grew, louder than he meant it to, deep and shaking, something loose and unexpected tearing free from his chest. May stared at him, stunned. Slowly, she lowered the spoon. A hesitant smile crept to the corner of her mouth. Then she laughed, too. Surprised, open, real. "I thought the whole cabin was going up," Cole gasped, wiping his eyes. "It was just the pot," she said, pushing wet hair from her face. They stood there, dripping, staring at each other in the wrecked kitchen. And in that moment, the heavy, suffocating fear that had wrapped around May finally fell away. She understood then that Cole wasn't going to hurt her. He wasn't going to shout. He was just a man who had forgotten how to laugh. And she was the one who had reminded him that laughter could heal more in 5 minutes than herbs ever could in 5 weeks. Spring came quietly. The snow thinned along the south-facing slopes, and the mountains began to breathe again. The snow pulled back, exposing stubborn brown earth beneath. The creek, silent for months, found its voice again, and began to murmur. Cole Ashwood pointed out a narrow stretch of ground behind the cabin where the sun lingered longest. "The soil's thin," he said, scuffing the dirt with his boot, "but it'll grow if we work it." They labored side by side, clearing stones and roots, their breath fogging the cold air. The work was hard. They traded turns with the hoe until their backs ached. Cole measured the rows with the heel of his boot, keeping them straight enough to satisfy the eye. May Rowan knelt in the dirt, pressing seeds into the furrows, beans, onions, squash. She covered them gently, as if tucking children into bed, treating each seed like something precious. One afternoon, she leaned back on her heels, wiping sweat from her brow, and studied the rocky, uneven patch they had claimed. "The ground's too hard," she said, a thread of doubt in her voice. "Nothing soft survives here." Cole leaned on the hoe. He knew the truth of it as well as she did. "It just needs patience," he said quietly. "Even the hardest ground gives, if you don't give up on it." The garden became their unspoken promise, a reflection of the fragile hope they were learning to trust. Later that week, the closeness of shared labor shifted into something more delicate. May decided Cole's winter coat was beyond saving. Patched and repatched, seams thick like old scars. "I can fix it," she insisted. She took a seat by the window where the light fell cleanest, needle flashing between her fingers. The wool was heavy, the tear awkward. "Hold this," she said gently. Cole sat beside her on the bench, keeping the fabric taut while she worked. They were close, closer than they'd been since the day he carried her up the mountain. He caught the scent of soap and pine, the fresh breath of the garden drifting in. He watched her tongue press lightly between her teeth in concentration. His hand brushed hers. She didn't pull away. The air thickened, charged with something that had nothing to do with fear or survival. It was the quiet pull of 2 lonely people recognizing one another. "I might have missed a stitch," she murmured, eyes fixed on the coat. "It holds," Cole replied, his voice rough. "That's what matters." They mended it together, her needle slow, his hands steady. The intimacy ran deeper than touch. They were repairing more than wool. They were stitching the frayed edges of their lives. Yet even as green shoots pushed through the garden soil, the past lingered in the corners. They were 2 people with unfinished histories. Nights were when truth pressed hardest. When the fire burned low and the wind rose outside, the silence demanded words. Cole rarely spoke of what came before, unless it forced its way out. One evening, staring into the embers, he said her name, Elin Ashwood, and let it hang in the air. She loved mornings, he said they gave a person another chance. May didn't ask what happened. She didn't ask how Elin died. She simply nodded, knowing some grief was too heavy to open all at once. She gave him the dignity of his silence, just as he had given her hers. But her own quiet was growing heavier. She sat by the window, darkness pressing against the glass, carrying a truth she could no longer keep to herself. I should tell you why I was running. Her words fell into the quiet. Cole Ashwood didn't answer right away. He reached for another log, fed it to the fire, and waited for the flames to settle. I was with someone, May Rowan began, her voice unsteady. A powerful man in the territories. A leader among men who hunt other men for money. Cole's jaw tightened. He knew the breed. He had once been one of them. I thought I was safe with him, she continued, but I learned things I wasn't meant to know, about men he sold out, about people who vanished. When she tried to leave, she said, he locked her away. Her gaze dropped to her hands, twisting the fabric of her skirt, the one Nora Bell had given her. He treats people like property, she whispered. If he finds me, I won't live. She never spoke a name. Cole, honoring the unspoken rules of the hunted, didn't ask for one. His thoughts drifted to his own betrayal, to Grady Holt, to how easily men convinced themselves that power made them right. He looked at May, the woman who had planted seeds in the hardest soil on the mountain. He glanced at the coat they had mended together. Then he spoke, his voice as firm as the beams above them. As long as you need. Her eyes lifted, searching his face for doubt. Why would you do that? Cole stared into the fire. Because I didn't before, he said, and I won't make that mistake again. That night, the mountains kept their silence. Beneath the cabin roof, two strangers rested, no longer quite strangers. They were survivors, learning the most dangerous skill of all, how to trust. But even as they slept, the wind shifted in the north, carrying the scent of a storm that had nothing to do with weather. The season of mending was ending. The season of reckoning was close. Cole had learned that peace is a jealous thing. It demands guarding, and it's often shattered not by a roar, but by a whisper. It happened on a Tuesday, an ordinary day, quiet and bright. The sun stood high, bleaching color from the creek stones. In the garden, the first stubborn green had finally taken hold. Cole walked down to the water with the buckets. The air smelled of pine resin and thawing earth. From 10 yards out, he saw it, a flash of metal against the dark bark of a ponderosa pine. It wasn't nature, it was intent, a knife, driven deep into the wood, pinning a folded piece of paper. Cole set the buckets down. Water spilled over the rims, darkening the dirt. He pulled the blade free. Slim, balanced, a city weapon, not made for the mountains. He unfolded the paper. No name, no seal, only a place and a time, written neat but careless. Miner's drop. Cole didn't need a signature. The handwriting was as familiar as his own. It belonged to a man who had shared his fire, his whiskey, his secrets. It belonged to Grady Holt. The name struck him like a blow to the chest. His former partner, the one who survived when Elin Ashwood died. A man whose ambition had always been a little too hungry, whose smile never reached his eyes. Cole Ashwood walked back toward the cabin, the paper crushed tight in his fist. The garden, only moments earlier a promise of tomorrow, now looked fragile, temporary, something that could be erased by a single hard frost or a single man. May Rowan was waiting by the door. One look at his face, and the color drained from hers. "They found us," she whispered. Cole handed her the note. She read it once, hands shaking. "Miner's Drop," she said, her voice catching. "That's the old quarry on the south slope. The ground's unstable there." "I know," Cole replied. "That's why he chose it." She looked up at him, terror sharp in her eyes. "We have to leave." She grabbed his arm. "Cole, we can pack. We can be over the ridge before sunset. If we run now, we might make it." Cole looked at her. Then he looked past her, into the cabin. He saw the coat she had mended hanging from its peg. The broom of willow twigs stood in the corner. Outside, the garden's squash and beans fought to root themselves in stubborn soil. He thought of the 5 years he had spent running from memory, from men, from the ghost of who he used to be. "I'm done running," Cole said quietly. May froze. "He'll kill you." "Maybe," Cole answered. "But if we run, he'll hunt us. And I won't live the rest of my days looking over my shoulder. Not with you." The choice settled between them, heavy and final. They didn't waste words on plans. They moved with the grim precision of soldiers. Cole cleaned his rifle, checked the revolver's action, and honed his hunting knife. May watched, fear hardening into resolve. She understood then. He wasn't going to Miner's Drop to die. He was going there to finish it. They left before dawn. The sky was the color of old iron, promising clear weather and unforgiving light. The climb toward the south slope was brutal. Loose shale, twisted roots, a relentless grade. Cole set a pace that punished without breaking. Miner's Drop cut the mountain like a wound. Men had once dug for silver there and found only disappointment. The earth fell away into a steep, merciless plunge, scattered with rock and scrub that would shred a body long before it reached the bottom. An old wooden platform jutted out over the abyss, its timbers bleached gray by the sun. They stepped into the clearing as the light climbed high enough to cast long, sharp shadows. "Stay back," Cole said softly. "Keep to the trees." "I'm not leaving you," May whispered. "I know. Just stay out of the line of fire." They didn't wait long. "Well now," a smooth, amused voice called out. "You actually made it." Grady Holt stepped from behind the ruins of the old winch house. 2 hired guns flanked him, Boone Ketch and Reed Slater, men who sold loyalty by the hour. Grady had changed in 5 years, broader, heavier through the middle, fine wool coat, polished boots. Power suited him. He looked like a man who slept on feather beds and drank imported whiskey. But his eyes were the same. Cold. Measuring. Grady Holt smiled. It was a slow curl of the mouth, empty of warmth. His eyes slid from Cole Ashwood to May Rowan, then back again. "So this is how it ends," Grady said, stepping onto the rotting platform. "The great Cole Ashwood, playing house with my runaway property." May stiffened. "I'm not yours," she called out, her voice ringing clearer than Cole expected. Grady laughed. "You were. You still are. You think running to a mountain hermit tears up a contract?" He turned his attention back to Cole. "She ran because she was scared. Did she tell you that?" "She ran because she knew too much," Cole said, his voice flat. "And because you treat people like cattle?" Grady shrugged. "I treat people like investments. Some pay off. Some require liquidation." He stepped closer, boots thudding hollow against the old boards. "You were always soft, Cole. Sentimental. That's why I had to move you aside." The words hung in the cold air. A chill spread through Cole's chest, freezing the anger before it could burn. He tightened his grip on the rifle. "Move me aside," Cole repeated. "Go on, old friend." Grady sneered. "You're a clever man. You tracked men through blizzards. You really think that bank job was bad luck? The world narrowed to a pinpoint. The wind stilled. Even the birds fell silent. You set it up, Cole said. The truth didn't shock him. It confirmed a nightmare he'd carried for 5 years. You knew I wouldn't be there. I needed you out of town for a few hours, Grady replied lightly, like he was talking about the weather. The job was meant to be clean, in and out, but your wife, Elin Ashwood, she had a habit of standing in the wrong place. His smile barely shifted. Her death wasn't the plan, but it was acceptable. Acceptable loss. The words ripped through the last of Cole's restraint. He no longer saw Grady Holt. He saw blood soaking into floorboards, an empty cabin. Years of silence. She wasn't a loss, Cole said, his voice terrifyingly calm. She was my life. Grady checked his pocket watch. Tragic, truly. But I've got a train to catch, and you've got a girl to return. He nodded to his men. Kill him. Violence broke loose in an instant. Boone Ketch raised his pistol. Cole fired from the hip without hesitation. The rifle cracked sharp in the thin air, and Boone dropped hard. Reed Slater dove behind a pile of rock, firing wildly. Bullets tore into the platform, splinters exploding like shrapnel. May screamed and threw herself behind a fallen log. Cole worked the lever, but the action jammed. Grit from the quarry, or maybe just bad luck. He tossed the rifle aside and drew his revolver, firing back until the hammer fell on an empty chamber. Grady saw his opening. He didn't reach for a gun. He wanted this close. He pulled a long, serrated hunting knife and charged. They crashed together with the force of 2 freight trains. Cole Ashwood and Grady Holt, partners turned enemies, locked together at the lip of the precipice. Grady was strong, fueled by the bulk of his own arrogance. He drove Cole backward, slashing for his face. You could have been something, Grady shouted, spitting the words. You could have ruled this territory with me. Cole ducked a swing that would have split his skull and drove a fist into Grady's ribs, feeling the soft give of flesh gone to fat. I'm done taking orders, Cole grunted. They clinched, arms locked, boots skidded on slick, rotting planks. Below them the drop yawned, an open mouth ready to swallow them whole. Grady leaned in, using his weight to crush Cole down, grinning inches from his face, sweat slicking his brow. Go be with her, Cole, he hissed. Go be with your ghost. But Grady made the mistake of fighting with rage, of believing himself too important to die. Cole wasn't fighting with rage. He fought with the cold, exact focus of the high mountains. He fought for the woman hidden in the trees, and for the peace he had finally built. Cole stopped resisting the shove. He turned. Using Grady's momentum, he pivoted on his heel. The movement was simple, clean, devastating. Grady lurched forward, his weight carrying him past Cole. He flailed, boots clawing for purchase on wet wood. There was nothing there. This is for her, Cole said, and for Elin Ashwood. Grady's eyes went wide. He grabbed for Cole's coat, fingers brushing the fabric, the very cloth May Rowan had mended with such care. The stitches held. Cole stepped back. Out of reach, Grady Holt fell. There was no scream. Only the heavy sound of impact on stone, echoing once, then again, then nothing. Silence took him. Cole stood alone at the edge, chest heaving. The remaining hired gun, seeing his paymaster vanish into the abyss, turned and ran, disappearing into the timber without a backward glance. The wind rushed back to fill the space where violence had been. The mountains stood vast and indifferent, as they always did. Cole turned slowly. May rose from behind the log, shaking. Her face was pale, but her eyes never left him. He walked to her. He felt no triumph, No joy, only the heavy, exhausting relief of a debt finally paid. "It's over," he said. She nodded, tears cutting clean tracks through the dust on her cheeks. "It's over." Yet as they stood in the quiet aftermath, a strange weight settled in Cole's gut. The danger was gone. The past lay broken at the bottom of the ravine. Still, when he looked at May, he saw a shadow in her eyes that hadn't been there before, one that had nothing to do with Grady Holt. They began the long walk back to the cabin. The victory was theirs, but the truth was waiting, sharper and colder than any blade. The return felt heavier than the climb to the mine. Violence leaves a hollow ringing in the ears, a silence that floods in where noise once lived. The mountains looked unchanged, even as something shifted inside him. The threat was gone. Grady Holt lay shattered below. The past, at last, had been laid down. As the cabin came back into view, a thin ribbon of smoke curling from the chimney where the fire still breathed beneath the ash, Cole Ashwood felt no relief. Instead, he felt the weight of attention from the woman walking beside him. May Rowan's steps were careful, measured, like someone afraid of leaving too deep a mark on the earth. They crossed the threshold together. The cabin stood as it always had, solid, unchanged, safe now. Home, if such a word still applied. Cole leaned his rifle against the wall and turned to her, ready to speak the words that would open whatever came next. "It's done," he said. "You're safe." But May did not look safe. She stood by the table with her back to him, shoulders drawn tight. Her hands shook as she reached into her satchel. "Are you hurt?" Cole asked, frowning. "No," she said too quickly. Far too quickly. She turned then, but didn't meet his eyes. Instead, she set a wrapped bundle on the table, oilcloth folded tight. Slowly, deliberately, she peeled it back. Inside was not paper, not proof. It was a dagger, slim, dark steel. The blade carried a resin that smelled faintly sweet and unmistakably deadly. Poisoned. The silence that followed pressed the air flat. Cole stared at the knife, then at the woman he had carried through snow, the woman whose coat he had helped mend, the woman whose garden he had tended beside. "I wasn't only running," May said, her voice breaking like dry timber. "I was sent." The words didn't arrive whole. They splintered in Cole's mind, refusing to settle. "Sent," he repeated. "Grady Holt has my sister," May whispered. Tears finally spilled free. "Lily Rowan. He took her months ago." She swallowed and went on. "He told me if I wanted her alive, I had to find you. Get close, make you trust me." She took a step toward Cole, then stopped, halted by an invisible wall that had just risen between them. "He told me to kill you," she said. "He gave me this knife. Said if I did it, my sister would go free." Cole didn't move. His hands clenched at his sides as every ordinary day they'd shared rose up between them. The burned stew, the laughter, seeds pressed into stubborn dirt. He had believed in those moments. He had built something fragile on top of them. "You were the trap," he said, his voice sounding foreign even to himself. "I was supposed to be," she sobbed. "But I couldn't. I told myself I could. But every day, every kindness you showed me, it became impossible." She looked at him then. "I fell in love with you, Cole. That part was never a lie." Cole laughed once, a sharp, hollow sound. "That's the worst kind of lie." He turned away, walking to the window, staring out at the indifferent mountains. He saw Elin Ashwood's face as it had been before blood, before silence. The old wound of betrayal tore open again, fresh and raw, He had opened his door, opened his life, and it had all been built to end him. "Why tell me now?" he asked without turning. "Because I needed you to know who I was," May said softly, "before I leave." He felt the word land heavy. "Leave? I can't stay. Not after this. Not after what I almost did." "You didn't do it," Cole Ashwood said. "I would have," May Rowan replied. The truth landed hard. Brutal. Clean. "If I'd been weaker, if you hadn't been who you are." Cole closed his eyes. He wanted to forgive her, wanted to pull her close and tell her Grady Holt was dead and none of it mattered. But trust, once broken, never fit together the same way again. The wound of betrayal was too fresh, too raw. "You should go," he said. The words tasted like ash. She flinched but didn't argue. She knew. She walked to the door and paused with her hand on the latch. She looked back, searching for permission, for forgiveness, for a way back. He had none to give. She stepped out into the cold light. The door closed behind her with a soft, final sound. Cole stood alone in the cabin. The fire crackled. The garden waited outside. Everything was as it had been, and nothing was. He went to the table, lifted the poisoned dagger, and carried it out. At the edge of the clearing, he hurled it into the ravine where Grady Holt had fallen and listened until the sound vanished. Then he went back inside and shut the door against the world. He was alone again. 2 years is a long time in a man's life. Long enough for mountains to reshape themselves with rock slides. Long enough for a heart to change. Cole learned that the hard way. The peaks were still there, vast and indifferent, but he no longer hid among them. He came down in stages, first to the foothills, then, finally, to the edge of dry willow. He wasn't the ghost in the timberline anymore. He built a new cabin just outside town, close enough to hear wagon wheels at dawn, far enough to keep the quiet he still needed. He planted vegetables with care and patience. He fixed fences for neighbors and sold what he didn't eat. People learned his name slowly. They liked him. He kept his word. He repaired what was broken. The past didn't disappear. It learned to sit quietly in a corner. Some mornings were easier than others. Some mornings he woke with her name already in his chest. It was one of those mornings. Clear sky, cool air. Coffee had just been poured when he saw a wagon coming up the lane. Not the postman. A delivery of winter supplies he'd ordered. He stepped onto the porch, wiping his hands on a rag. The driver climbed down, dusting off a sturdy travel coat. Cole stopped. The rag slipped from his fingers. It was May Rowan. She looked different. Older, perhaps, but stronger. Her hair was tied back, simply. The sharp edge of fear was gone from her eyes, replaced by something steadier. Earned. She stood tall, meeting his gaze without flinching. For a long moment neither spoke. The air between them held 700 days of unsaid words. "I brought your grain," she said quietly. The sound of her voice struck him square in the ribs. "I didn't know you were in Dry Willow," Cole said. "I'm not," she answered. "I live 2 towns over," May Rowan said. "I have work. My sister, she's safe. She's in school." She spoke it with quiet pride. She had done what she set out to do. She had saved her family, and somewhere along the way she had saved herself. She hadn't come back to plead. She had come back to show him she was free of the past. Whole. "I'm not who I was," she said. "I know," Cole Ashwood replied. "Neither am I." She hesitated, then turned to climb back onto the wagon. "I just wanted to deliver the order." "Wait," Cole said. He stepped down from the porch and crossed the yard to the fence line. Beyond it lay the garden he'd planted here, rows of corn and beans standing strong in deeper soil. "The garden's doing well," she said, following his gaze. "It is," he answered. "The soil here runs deeper. It holds the roots." They talked then, not about knives or ravines or betrayal. They spoke of weather, of grain prices, of how evening light settled on the hills. They spoke like two people handling something fragile but familiar. As the sun caught loose strands of her hair, Cole understood that forgiveness wasn't a sudden miracle. It was work, like clearing stones from a field, one rock, then another, until there was room for something to grow. He opened the gate. "I don't want what we had before," he said. May stiffened slightly. "Neither do I." "I want something better," he continued. "Something built with eyes open. I'm done with the past. I want what we build now." She searched his face, looking for the man who had sent her away. He was gone. In his place stood someone ready to stay. "And if the storm comes back?" she asked. "Then we weather it," he said. "Together." She nodded, and this time, she didn't leave. They married in the small church in Dry Willow on a quiet morning. There was no finery, no spectacle, only wood, light, and steady breath. The preacher spoke of forgiveness as a practice, not a feeling. When Cole took her hand, his grip was firm and certain. Years later, people said the mountain man finally came home. Cole knew better. Home wasn't a place you ran back to, not a cabin in the snow or a house at town's edge. Home was something you built, piece by piece, with the courage to stay when every instinct told you to run. Their story proves redemption is never sudden. It's made slowly, through hard choices, honest work, and the courage to forgive others and ourselves. In the wide silence of the West, Cole Ashwood and May Rowan learned that true love isn't about rescue. It's about two wounded people building a shelter strong enough to stand through the storm. Finally, let me send my deep thanks to you. Thank you for listening, and for allowing this story to speak to your heart. The Wild West still holds countless truths, some painful, some tender, all worth remembering. Stay with us, subscribe, comment, and invite others to discover these untamed stories, from our hearts to yours. Thank you for being part of this journey. Aviso legal. Disclaimer: each story shared here is produced for storytelling enjoyment. Certain scenes may include fictional or dramatized elements inspired by historical circumstances. Although AI tools assist us in visuals, narration, and script development, the emotional tone, editing, and quality control are conducted by people to ensure meaningful experiences. We fully uphold YouTube's policies, using no deceptive recreations or impersonations of real individuals. All creative resources are properly licensed. Unauthorized copying, re-uploading, or remixing is not permitted. Thank you for supporting the effort behind every episode we create.